The
All right,
Great White North.
the Great White North. What do you say we get started?
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. It is the third Wednesday of every month. That means it's time for the Kubernetes office hours. If you're in the channel listening, please let us know how the audio sounds. We always like to make sure that we sound and look good. So I'm George Castro. I'm your host. Let's start with some introductions. Let's go, Chris, Mario, Pavlas, Dave, and Marco. You can, as the new person, you can go last.
And hopefully I won't trip over my tongue here.
Yeah.
My name is Chris. I'm a customer engineer with Google Cloud's public sector up here in Canada. My background has been primarily running on-prem Kubernetes installations until I joined Google. So hopefully I'll be able to impart some of that knowledge on you, and looking forward to helping any way I can today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mario Loria. I am a senior SRE for StockX in Detroit, Michigan. We are a retail kind of e-commerce platform. I own our Kubernetes infrastructure on EKS, as well as a lot of developer-centric things like CI/CD, Helm, and other things like that. So my interests really lie in the EKS parts, kind of configuring, upgrading clusters, life cycles, pod lifecycle, and helping developers understand horizontal pod auto scaling and things like that. So,
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Pavlas Varsatskas. People call me Pav for simplicity. I'm a certified Kubernetes administrator. I do a lot of work around monitoring Kubernetes. So yeah, that type of thing.
My name's Dave Strabel. I work on the Azure Cloud team as a cloud native architect and work a lot around day two operations, networking, security within Kubernetes.
And I'm Marco Ceppi. I'm the director of engineering of Vapor.io, which is a small startup that's building edge co-location facilities. So data centers co-located on cell tower sites. And we leverage Kubernetes entirely throughout our infrastructure, both in cloud as well as on and inside each data center for control plane services.
And I'm your host today, George Castro. I started this program to learn about Kubernetes. And so I figured we would do it as a community program together. And I'm a community manager at VMware. So we're going to go over how this works. Feel free, those of you who are listening in the channel and hash office hours on Slack, say hello, where you're from, what you're working on. We love to see the chat scrolling during the middle of the stream, which you should see here on the side. But let's go over some ground rules. Here we go. So before we begin, let's start by introducing, we did that. Here's some ground rules. This is a Kubernetes event, so the code of conduct is in effect. So please be excellent to each other. We never really had an issue with that. This is also a judgment-free zone. Everyone had to start from somewhere. So please help out everybody. There are no dumb questions. All skill levels are welcome to participate. So let's try to be positive there when it comes to all of our levels of expertise. And while we will do our best to answer your questions, the panel doesn't have access to your cluster. So live debugging is off topic. We can't like really SSH to your stuff and like fix your control plane, that kind of thing. But what we can do is try to help you get into the right mindset or where to look to find your problem, so you can at least unblock whatever thing you're stuck on and at least hopefully give you a direction on where to go so you can like progress in fixing your problem here. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on your answers with your experiences and pro tips. Part of the reason we ask you to come on is because of your expertise and your production experience, things like that. Audience, this is a participatory sport, so you can help by pasting in URLs to the official docs, blogs, or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand. I know that we have a lot of experience out in the audience as well, so please feel free to help out by just typing in the chat. I know every time that someone's asking for tools or something, there's always a new GitHub link that someone drops and we learn about a new tool and things like that. And then what I do is at the end of the show, I grab all the URLs and I whack them into the show notes so we have some reference material for those of you who can't come live. Feel free to post your questions just directly in chat. Just put question : or something that makes it obvious so we can see it. And then what we do, we'll stick that in our notes and then we'll get to the questions in the order that we received them. If you have a pre-made question from discuss.kubernetes.io or Stack Overflow, you can just link the paste the link to that so we can read that, so you don't have to rewrite your question if you already have it. You can also help us by tweeting, spreading the word, paying it forward, anything that might help people who are using Kubernetes, be exposed to this content would be appreciated. And as always, if you stick around to the end, we do a raffle where we give away a snazzy Kubernetes t-shirt, which I'm wearing today. It's one of these. The way it works is we'll pick two. If we've addressed your question on the air, all you have to do is ask it. We will raffle out 2 t-shirts. So we're giving out 2 today and 2 this afternoon. There is a West Coast session in about 2 hours after this live stream that will cover that part of the world. So this is the EU session. So with that, how's everyone feeling today? Let me check out the notes. Joel is here. Konstantinos is here. Awesome. Ari's here. He's got a question. I see it. Vishnu, thanks for your question. Looks like Dimitri has a question. Okay, let's get started. Marco, I want you to kick it off real quick because we asked for questions and you pasted an entire paragraph. I know a lot of it is background information, but we do get questions like this at all. So let's just spend a minute to talk about it. So what's your question?
Oh yeah, I'll resummarize. After I pressed enter in the Slack, I was like, you know what? I probably should have asked this elsewhere. But
Yeah.
So we run a bunch of edge data centers. They're unmanned units, and we have a bunch of interesting hardware that we run there that like taps into like all of our OT systems, like power management and all that stuff. So it's this crazy hardware platform that is basically a motherboard and some RAM and some CPU and some disk. And we have like 6 to 10 of those. And so we run Kubernetes on it, and it works really well for us. Kubernetes helps to keep our like 400 plus pods that do all the control plane stuff running there. But we have 2 pods in particular that need storage. One's a stateful set, it's a Postgres database, and one's a deployment, it's a Prometheus database. And the problem we have is that these hardware nodes will power down occasionally, and they have unreliable BMC, so I can't like go reboot it remotely. There's no IPMI. So a tech has to go and reboot them. The problem we've encountered is when it comes to storage and persistent storage, either whether it's a pod or a stateful set, when that node goes away, Kubernetes thinks that the storage is still attached. And I've read through the code and the comments, and this is expected behavior because they don't know when that node will return. So it doesn't want to remove the storage in effect of deadlocking or doing terrible things to corruptions of file systems. So our problem is we need these stateful sets to be running more often than not. We don't care as much about the persistence of that storage, like the validity or the safe regards there, because we know the node is powered down. It's like there's nothing mounted there anymore. We found a way to have Kubernetes short circuit and remount volumes by deleting the node from our cluster. The biggest problem that we have is that even when we do that, Kubernetes will still sometimes say, no, this volume is attached somewhere else or already running attached to a pod. I'm not going to reallocate it until we do a bunch of like forced deletions and some other things from GitHub threads and issues that have gotten us to the point where like we can somewhat reliably, very intensely recover storage. My question to the panel, in particular, into the community is: have people encountered this? I know on cloud providers they're very good about when a node goes offline or is removed, because of that really, really good integration with those cloud providers. Remapping storage and stuff is all possible, and most cloud providers provide read-write many, where we have rewrite single or rewrite one in ours. What's the best way for us to kind of move forward until we can retrofit our hardware to be more reliable with a reliable out-of-band controller? How can we make sure that these workloads come back online and storage attaches appropriately in a reasonable time, other than kind of codifying the hacks that we've done today to recover the cluster? Probably as long as the paragraph I typed.
Yeah, thanks for keeping it simple for the first question.
I'm trying hard.
So I think most of the issues described is mostly relevant to Rook and Ceph, right? This is what you are actually using.
So we are using Rook and Ceph, but we've used other mediums. We've settled on Rook and Ceph because we have Ceph experience, but any storage driver that is read-write single has the same effect, where Kubernetes won't unmount or remount the volume storage because it sees it as being mounted elsewhere, whether it's at I'm not sure if it's something that's with the CSI driver for Ceph or with the other ones we've used, but when we use something like NFS and read-write many, it's not a problem because we can explicitly mount multiple pods to a single data storage. So we haven't found, and maybe the answer is here's a better storage provider, but other than like NFS and a few others, we haven't found as equally performance of storage compared to Ceph's RBDs to provide us with the kind of, we do a lot of, it's a lot of writes on these devices. So that's our problem, is we can't really use an alternative storage provider that eliminates this with read write many, but we haven't found either a solution to this or a more performant read write many storage class provider, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's more than Ceph, unfortunately. I really wish that was an easier fix.
Yeah, because we're running workloads on Google Cloud, on Amazon, and we can shut down a node, and we can still, like, Amazon EBS actually does this, and it's still like that pod would actually unmount and go onto another node and actually mount there. So I think this is more like a problem with either CSI drivers or yeah, Ceph or Rook in particular. One of my suggestions is you can actually just run things on local nodes. For example, for Prometheus, you definitely don't want to be running this on Rook or Ceph, because you can just have like multiple Prometheus replicas, each writing into local disk. And then basically, if one node goes down, you still have another replica which is constantly scraping for metrics. The problem with the current approach, for example, is that basically if your Ceph stops working, or it just goes down completely, you will lose all your monitoring, because basically Rook is down, Prometheus can't write to its volume, and yeah. So
yeah, that's a really good point, that we could definitely re-architect Prometheus to be almost like a daemon set where it just runs with a local volume like you suggested.
Yeah.
That would definitely eliminate that issue for us. We still have a Postgres database that's critical to our flow of data from our devices to our Prometheus, which is still a stickler. But I suppose another thing we could do is similarly just run Prometheus in a clustered configuration, or sorry, Postgres in a clustered configuration, removing the need for block storage directly. That's super interesting. We hadn't considered that architecture yet.
That is, yeah. That seems a little too simple. That seems
well,
too
it
good to
doesn't,
be true,
doesn't
but
address the problem
well,
that we have with, like the controller manager and storage, but it removes our need to worry about it for now, which is a good stepping stone for us, because we have a little ways to go before we get better hardware in these sites. So the real problem is the hardware. We're just kind of attacking it from a software perspective.
Yeah. All right. Well, Marco, I hope that gets you started. In the meantime, feel free to hang out on the panel in the background. If there's a question you want to help answer, feel free. I know you're babysitting today. All right. Moving on to the next question. Thanks, Marco, for dropping by. We have Ari. Thanks for coming. Says, one thing that everybody uses Kubernetes for is, I love this question, by the way. One thing that everyone uses Kubernetes for is to make sure that the pods have enough CPU and memory on the nodes through resource requests and limits. And the Kubernetes scheduler does a good job of making sure that the nodes aren't overscheduled in terms of CPU and memory. My question is, what about disk I/O and networking? The underlying node storage and networking will have a real limit to IOPS, etc. Are there plans to get Kubernetes to allow pods to define storage and network requirements and not overschedule storage and networking requirements on nodes which cannot handle their requests? Panel. I've always wondered this myself. Like, you know, usually people are talking about CPU and RAM limits, but then like,
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, when you ask about nodes, they're just like, just put the fastest storage you can on it. Like,
yeah,
okay.
That's not something that's crossed my mind before. That's a good, good scenario. At least I haven't hit that kind of scale where it's become an issue. I'm not sure about other people.
Yeah. Mario, you're muted if you're trying to. I think Mario's having technical issues.
Yeah, he's got some audio issues.
Yeah. Now you're showing up as muted, but when you talk, it doesn't hear. Anybody else have thoughts on this?
So I remember basically Kubernetes has like an annotation which allows you to limit network throughput, but it doesn't allow you to request it or that kind of thing. So yeah, so there is basically, if your CLI plugin supports it, you currently can like limit one pod to say, let's say, please just use up to like 10 megabytes per second or something like that.
Right.
So that's already basically an annotation in Kubernetes. I don't have any other comments.
Would you be able to do that through custom metrics, maybe? It's a little bit more artisanal, but you might be able to do something off of that.
Mario, you're muted if you're trying to. You're muted in Zoom if you're trying to. Okay. Dave, any comments? Any guesses?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know some of the different software-defined storage like Portworx and Rook and that do have things that you can set like priorities and guaranteed quality of service on the storage volumes. But just like raw disk from, say, a cloud provider, typically doesn't have that type of feature where you can limit what the storage is. But that being said, it is a very important topic because I see a lot of users run into this, especially from like the actual OS disk that gets mounted. Because there's a lot of things actually hitting that OS disk if you're the Docker daemon paths there. So all your logging, everything's hitting that disk. And if you're limited on that, you're going to get weird just flakiness in your cluster where nodes go not ready. It could impact like kube system pods, those type of things. So it's something you definitely want to monitor for and keep a good eye out on for those storage metrics. I think Prometheus probably does the best job with this of the node exporter and that. Where you can get very good detailed information from the storage layer out of it. But from the limiting like IOPS per like pod in that, you'd probably have to look at like some software defined storage right now to get those type of features.
Okay. And the next question, hopefully that'll get you started. I know I've seen issues in GitHub there, for people asking why I just can't like, set a little limit like you can with everything else. But I don't remember the details of that. All right, any other comments on this one before we move on? Okay, moving on. Dimitri, hope I got your name right, says, good morning. I have a question about cluster utilization. I am setting resource requests and limits for our services, and I was curious how to approach these. Should I set requests based on peak load, or should I allow limits to handle those? My current request setup leaves my cluster at about less than 20% utilization, and I was wondering how I should approach increasing my utilization. Interesting question.
Testing. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. I would love to respond to this one. We're kind of going through the same thing right now. So resource requests and limits are incredibly hard to really understand without actually analyzing and spending a lot of time effectively looking at your workload over time, especially from a development perspective. Kind of asking developers to do this is a little bit, it's a little bit hard to do. They really have other things, other priorities. There's some tools out there that help with this. One of which, and I think we mentioned it before, is called Goldilocks from the Fairwinds Ops teams. And really that just provides a fancy UI to the vertical pod autoscaler, which sits and kind of observes and then makes recommendations for possible resource requests that you could set. I think another thing to keep in mind here is that the different QoS classes, burstable is probably what you're using for the most part. If you have like a request that's, let's say, 100 milli CPUs, but a limit that's 200 milli CPUs. And there's a better one, I say better, asterisk there, that is guaranteed, where you actually have your request and limit exactly the same. And that basically gives your application, if it does need to inflate, those resources are already reserved and guaranteed, and that helps with your nodes having issues as well, and you trying to oversubscribe the allocation that you allow for your nodes. We've run into all of those sorts of issues, including working with developers to help kind of get this set up. It's not easy, and they are required for things like HPA and really for cluster autoscaler as well. To have an effectively kind of auto-scaled, resilient cluster, they're kind of pivotal. There's no perfection here. A lot of it's just trying. And I think my big thing that I tell people is have something, especially a limit especially a request, even if it's a little low. The other thing too, and this is, I believe there's, I think there's startup resources. I know there's startup pros. I think startup resources might be a thing, or a cap. I'm not sure. But we have issues with some of our node apps where they start up and they take over a CPU core, and then they come back down in normal state within 30 seconds, and they're back to 200 milli CPU, right? And we can't put a limit on that, because what's the point of doing a limit that's 1.5 CPUs, right? That just doesn't make sense. So again, this is not perfect. I would say look into Goldilocks, see if it can get you at least a UX perspective of some suggested values, and really look at your critical workloads, the bigger workloads on your cluster, especially daemon sets and stateful sets as well. So we just had an issue with Datadog agents that were just kept inflating, no limits on them in the default deployment, and our cluster autoscaler kept autoscaling. We got up to 220 nodes when we really only need 90 for our basic platform in its normal state. So definitely from an operations perspective, this takes a little bit of investment. So I'll shut up now.
Any other recommendations?
I would just reiterate kind of what Mario said. Like, resource management is something I see a lot of people struggle with because it has a lot of impact on other things. Like if you're using the horizontal pod autoscaler, how does request work with that? So it's something you do want to invest a lot of time in, is really understanding resource management in Kubernetes. Just because I see a lot of people struggle with it. There's a lot of little things you kind of have to know about it, from what Mario said about the different classes of burstable, guaranteed, those type of things that you just really have to invest time to try to understand as best as you can. But you'll never have it perfect day one or even day 365. But just invest that time to really try to understand it.
Mm. And I wanted to get this on the video, but Dimitri asked a follow up on why 1.5 would be too high for you, Mario. Is it because it's bursty and then you'd waste that reservation?
Yeah, it's kind of a waste to even define it. I mean, you could still do it definitely, and if the application still inflated and kept going, but really at that point, you're just setting it for the sake of setting it. You're not really providing much value, and it's so high that, you know, if it's at 200 and then it jumps to 1.5, you know, that's kind of tanking that node a little bit, depending on if you set your allocatable for the node as well. So when you oversubscribe nodes like that, things are not happy, and that's the burstable QoS class. Let me put a link to the QoS class stuff in here as well. So
yeah, that would be fantastic. So Mario's drop his links there. Any other comments on this topic? Pablo, looks like you had something. Everybody has an opinion on this one. We'll be right back.
I was just going to agree with everybody. What we did was we were kind of ran what resources they need, and then we set them afterwards. So just observe with metrics, find out where you're happy, and set it for that.
Yeah, to add to that, also, like where I work, we also struggle a lot with resource management. Like a lot of teams just over provision resources or under provision. It's just a super complex problem. So right now we are sort of looking into vertical pod autoscaler. Basically, that's a software you can run, and which would basically automatically pick correct resource requests for you. So yeah, I'm right now investigating this approach. Maybe it will work. I really hope it will. I know Google actually has written a paper about this, and most of the people in Google, like I think 90% of them actually use automated software called Autopilot. So I do believe basically software can solve this resource management problem. So yeah.
All right, the questions keep coming. Keep on asking them. If I've missed your question, please just let me know in Slack. Next question comes from Joel Davis, who says, "Is there anything in RBAC that allows you to select against certain namespaces? For example, if I want to give someone the ability to create new namespaces of which they have access to star verbs on star resources, but not interact with a given set of namespaces, is that possible to do through RBAC?" Let me see some of the replies people are asking. C10 wants to point out that OpenShift does this using an operator that creates RBAC resources on the creation of a new namespace, and has a link to that, which I will put in the thing here into the main channel. Any ideas on this? Max Guy says OPA might help. Anybody? Wow, we got stumped. All right, let's keep this one open here. Oh, Joel has some information. Says there's nothing built in because you have to bind the permissions within the namespace after creating it. A webhook or operator is about the only solution. So I think if you're not using OpenShift, is there a non-OpenShift version of a operator like this? Or let's see. Like just scanning through the README here.
Yeah, it feels like OPA should help solve this problem, no? I have never used OPA, to be honest, but
Yeah.
Yeah, you could pre-declare things in OPA to prevent that, but it's not really touching the RBAC. That user would still have to be kind of pre-granted permissions in RBAC to create a namespace. Like our OPA would just be, or Gatekeeper would just be checking the API request, so it'd still ultimately need the RBAC permission to actually do anything. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how other people do that with the identity providers and stuff. It might be something in there, but
this is interesting too. Nadir has a link that says there's some work going on in the multi-tenancy working group for this hierarchical namespace controller HNC, which I've not heard about. So that link looks interesting. Anybody else have any ideas here?
Yeah, I've only seen, I know a few that have just created their own webhook or operator to do this exact same thing.
Yeah. So it sounds like an operator is going to be the way to go there. So hopefully that helps you out, Joel. Feel free to post follow-up questions, or a lot of people are just responding to each question in threads. So please keep that up there. Joel Speed, welcome back, says something that's come up through my work recently: when hosting metrics endpoints in an application, should people require auth and auth-z to access them, i.e. something like kube RBAC proxy be put in front, or the functionality be implemented into the application? So
I believe right now Prometheus folks are actually working on this, and so for example, Node Exporter recently added, I think, like basic auth or something like that for metrics endpoint. So I believe client metrics will also have similar feature if it doesn't already. So yeah, basically, I don't think you really need proxies because it will be supported natively. I'll try to find some good links.
Sure. Any other recommendations for Joel? We have 2 Joels today in the audience. All right, Joel, that will hopefully get you started. Bao Louis, I hope I got that right, asks, is there any storage backup recommended solution? I know this comes up every once in a while.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking at an open source solution for it, Valero is probably the one I've seen most utilized out there. There are some startups that are doing a lot around backup, like Katzen and that. But Valero is the one I've seen probably most adopted.
Yeah, I'm biased since I work with the Valero team, so I can't really.
That's what I stepped in to say.
I can't talk about how great it is, you know.
The other thing, if it's for like storage on the PVCs, your storage provider might have a separate solution to back up individually like that. So cluster state, Valero, I've heard nothing but amazing things about. Or even if you're following GitOps, you already have your state-ish within Git. But for storage, yeah, that might be something you want to look at the provider for.
Yeah, if anyone in the audience also has any different recommendations, feel free to just toss the link there in chat. All right, anything else on backups? All right, next question comes from Andre. He says, hi, volume question. On the volumes documentation page, we can read Kubernetes supports several types of volumes, generic. What does it mean Kubernetes supports? Particular, seems GlusterFS client comes with Hypercube to Kubernetes node. Also seems Hypercube is going to be deprecated. How will Kubernetes continue to support such kind of volumes? Will be great to hear about how to bring the latest, most fresh GlusterFS client onto Node and unlock developers so that they can use the latest GlusterFS, which deployed somehow somewhere from our Kubernetes cluster as a client. Sorry, this question is hard to read. Resource questions. Would you wait? All right, that's a second question, I think. Let me try to find the original question here in the channel. Anybody have thoughts on this one? While I get. Okay, here we go. So here's a volumes doc page that they are referring to. Let's just have a look. Okay, so types of volumes, it lists the usuals, right? Like Azure Disk, CephFS, Cinder, Portworx volumes. So what, the first question is, what do we mean by support? Like, and also, I'm going to add my own little thing here. How does this differ from like, I thought everything just supported CSI and then you would just get that, right? Or is this like a native support thing? I think I've confused myself. Pav, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah. So basically, one of those types of volumes is TSI. So right now,
Right.
Kubernetes has a bunch of integrated clients. For example, AWS, EBS, or Azure Disk. So generally support means that you can actually, kubelet, Kubernetes node agent can actually connect to that type of volume and mount it to your pod.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, so it seems GlusterFS kind of comes with Hypercube to Kubernetes node. So let's look at the link that they sent here. So I'm confused. So I'm totally confused here. Just kind of showing my lack of knowledge in this area. I thought everything just talked to CSI, like through CSI, and that like nothing really like talked directly to the storage. Like I thought this was being moved out of core, like.
Well,
Yeah,
depends
so
if you're
work
using
is
it
still
or not.
Right.
work is still in progress. So I believe there
Okay.
are some clients which
Okay.
still use old ones, and there are some new clients which use CSI.
Got you. Do we generally tell people use the CSI interface if available, or are people just directly
So
talking to GlusterFS in this case?
We used Flex Volume for a really long time because I couldn't get CSI to work because I didn't read the documentation very well. But once we moved to CSI for our Rook Ceph stuff, it was a very night and day experience for like our storage observability. I'm pretty sure Gluster has a CSI driver, so that's if you're not using CSI today, it might be worth investigating trying it out with the driver you're using, because there are a lot of native Kubernetes objects that CSI provides that gives you way better introspectability on what's happening with the storage. And that's how we discovered a lot of our failings from earlier, like was just moving to CSI gave us a ton of more information and more configurability.
Is it safe to say that probably most current and future development is going towards the CSI side of things and not the what do people call these native drivers? Like what's the name?
I don't know. There's a page on the CSI site that has like supported drivers, and there is like an order of magnitude more supported drivers there than in like the traditional Flex Volume in tree supported driver. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of concerted efforts. I think storage vendors that want to be a part of Kubernetes know CSI is the way to put their driver abstraction into Kate. So a lot of development is going there if it hasn't already reached a relatively mature state.
Yeah, I was just surprised when I read this. I thought everything had moved to CSI by now. But
Yeah, I would say it's going to be very dependent on your storage provider
Mhm.
and if their CSI driver is stable or not. Like for example, like in Azure, we have a CSI driver, but it's maturing and getting to a stable state.
Mhm.
When that's supported, that's when you would use CSI. So I think it would be dependent a lot on your storage provider, whether you're using a cloud-hosted storage provider or a different type of storage, whether it supports CSI.
Mhm.
Uh,
Right.
Just to quickly add to that, I mean, some of the in-tree drivers are actually a bit more resilient than TSI drivers. At least I had some experience with TFFS and basically fuse type of drivers. Then you just kick one driver node, and then a bunch of pods actually lose connection to basically to data. So I mean, it really depends on technology you're using, and yeah, I'll link to a couple of interesting issues around that.
Got you. All right. Also, they have a follow-up question. So notes for Andre, check what is CSI. Is there a GlusterFS CSI thing available? I'm like reasonably certain that's what you want to go with.
Yeah, I just dropped the link to the CSI docs driver list. It's there.
All right, and Andrew has a follow-up question related to the last. We talked about this already a little bit, but would you recommend to limit CPU/memory for Cube API and etcd running as static pods?
I cannot answer that because I'm using cloud, which they manage it for me. I would say everything, especially critical services, should have limits, and you should have monitoring in place so that, you know, warnings when things are getting hot, 70, 80%, something like that, right? So those are operational things that like you should just be on top of, but they should have limits because they can again impact other workloads, and there is a problem there as well. So you want to cut that off sooner rather than later.
Anybody else? Yeah, that seemed pretty straightforward. All right, Andrea, I hope that helps you out. Let us know how you get on with that. Kanabin asks, hi, is there an official / recommended Grafana template for monitoring the entire Kubernetes ecosystem? Metrics on API server, kubelet, scheduler. What other tools are people to get a big picture of it? That's the I want a really cool dashboard. What do I use?
So yeah, actually, I wrote those dashboards. They are available in Kubernetes Mixin, which is basically it's a JSONnet thingy which generates you a bunch of Prometheus alerts and Grafana dashboards. I'll give you a link. Yeah, enjoy.
Awesome. I'm going ahead and trimming the monitoring mixins. Okay. That is good to know. So are there just a bunch of goodies in here that I should know about?
Yeah. Basically, there are a bunch of like, I think about 10 dashboards.
Nice.
Yeah, I wrote a dashboard for API server, kubelet, kubeproxy, all the components. There are a bunch of cool people contributing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Definitely check it out.
This is why I love this show. Like just stuff like this is like perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
You're getting a star for that one. That's awesome.
For sure. I didn't even know that. I didn't even know Kubernetes monitoring was like a namespace. So I gotta dig through there. That's always a good one. Awesome. So let us know how that goes, everybody. And everybody thank that repo by giving it a star when you get to it and if you use it. Next, Mahir Shah asks, how to set custom metrics for HPA? Also, whoever answers this question, tell me what HPA is.
Horizontal pod autoscaler.
What's the TLDR on that thing? Just, yeah, I want to make sure that you listeners also
Oh,
don't
sure. Yeah,
understand
sorry.
what we're talking
So
about. Yeah.
the horizontal pod autoscaler is another top level API object. What it does is it monitors the percentage of your instances, the average usage for either CPU or memory or other metrics as well that you can set thresholds on. And it measures that against, specifically for CPU and memory, what you requested. So going back to those resource requests we talked about, let's say if you said 100 milli CPU was what you requested, and your application, the average of all the instances as part of that deployment is up to 80% of that, and you have a 80% threshold set on your HPA, then HPA will start to take action. That's either scaling in or scaling out, depending. So either killing instances that aren't needed or adding instances to meet that threshold that you set. So the question here is specifically around like external metrics or custom metrics. Usually what happens is there's a controller that can provide those for you. So for instance, we use Datadog, and they have a cluster agent which can provide custom metrics. And that cluster agent kind of taps into all of the metrics that the agents are collecting. So basically anything that we have that gets reported to Datadog, any metric at all, that's available either through AWS or Datadog native, or that we're reporting up through a service, et cetera, we can set thresholds and have HPA scale on that, right? And so that makes things super nice. We haven't done a lot of the custom metric stuff yet. We've really honed in on the CPU and memory, but you can really, like, again, this can be a rabbit hole if you kind of know some of the key metrics. So maybe if error rate goes up, you want to add some instances, but more so latency and other sensitive metrics around your application, you can do that. So you should also include or look at things like monitoring for that and alerts as well. It's not a 100% solve all solutions. I also want to point out, and I'll link it here in the channel, there's another project that's in the CNCF called Kita. And that actually taps into other constructs, like, for instance, an AWS SQS queue size can be something that you set a threshold on and say, okay, well, if we're over 10,000 entries and 10,000 queue entries, then we need to scale up or something like that. So that makes things a lot easier. And I think this is really cool. There's a lot of things the community's been bringing lately. So I highly recommend people look into it.
Anybody else have recommendations? All right, we got about 15 minutes left and about 2 or 3 questions in the queue. So keep on asking, audience, if you have questions. Meanwhile, we will get to the next question, which Mario answered with a bunch of links. And Mario, I'm going to ask you to take those links and toss them in the main channel here. But Jojo Pat asks, is there a tool for testing Kubernetes service latency? Mario responded with a bunch of links, but let me give the other panelists a chance to field this if they wish.
To me, that yells kind of service meshy kind of stuff, but I'm going to try to find what Mario said, because there's probably something smaller too.
Yeah, you have links here to like artillery. Do you want me to paste those? I got them right here, Marco or Mario. Sorry.
So I'm Mario. He's Marco. No, go ahead and paste them. I can't seem to find that thread right now.
Yeah, I got them right here. So yeah.
I was going to say, I mentioned before that we were kind of in a service mesh research mode, and me and my coworker put together a Google Doc and just like vomited a bunch of things in our brain and stuff I had started GitHub and all that. And these kind of were the front runners when it came to performance testing. And specifically, I think the big ones for me are the Glue Shot, the Kate CNI benchmark, and probably Ripsaw. In terms of, I want to see both like service latencies out of the cluster, in the cluster, service to service, things like that. Those are the sorts of metrics that we were going to try to kind of observe when it came to certain CNIs, i.e. Linkerd or something using Envoy, et cetera. So there's no like perfect. It really depends on your needs. Some are more declarative than others. I really like what Solo's been doing as well. KS Mesh is, again, just everyone knows the KS stuff. That came originally kind of from Netflix, and now there's 18 different solutions for that. So that does that for a service mesh. Artillery is kind of a go-to for some of our front-end teams as well. just from like very outside on my laptop, how is performance. So again, be careful with these tools. Don't DDoS yourself. But yeah, they're pretty configurable, and they provide a lot of rope to hang yourself with. So
Yeah, like Ripsaw is like an operator, and it claims to be the Chuck Norris of cloud benchmarks. I just think that's interesting.
yeah,
Wow, there are a lot more tools in this space than I was expecting. Any other comments from people on this one?
Oh, just thanks, Mario, for providing that list.
Yeah,
that's huge.
So are you still in the exploratory phase, or actually have you actually put these through their paces, kind of thing?
No, we're still exploratory. I think we've narrowed it down mostly to like probably not doing Kuma, which was Kong's. We're probably focused more on Linkerd and Consul right now. Istio, we're a small team. We're still kind of a small company. I think Istio is just a little bit more complex. I know there's Aspen Mesh, which is really making that a lot easier and providing support services as well for it. But I think Istio is a little bit over our head in terms of what we really need. And I think Linkerd is kind of where we're leaning into right now, but we're still going, we're going very slowly. There's been a few emergency fires, dumpster fires that we've had to solve for the past 2 weeks.
And as far as these tools that you link to, have you put these under Anger, or are you still investigating these?
No, we're still investigating these. I would say that the CNI benchmark and the and probably Ripsaw and Glueshot, like I said, like those are going to be my, like when we do get there, those are the ones I'm installing first for the most part.
Sweet. So anybody else have recommendations here or experience? Anyone in the audience? Feel free to just plop it in chat. All right, moving on. Caroline Pauls, welcome, says, given a current updating deployment, rolling in a new replica set and rolling out to the previous one, which replica set are pods taken away from if a user or scaler decreases the deployment's replica count?
It should be the current, the single, I believe there's usually a single replica set active, and that could be wrong depending on what's going on. But for the most part, it should be whatever the last interacted with one is, I believe. And usually there's only one that I've seen, but I don't even watch replica sets that much anymore. So I'd be interested in more like a top layer, like what is the problem that they're seeing, or what are they trying to investigate?
Caroline, we can give you some time there to give us follow-up. Feel free to just keep typing. There are some questions that I appear to have missed, so let me go back here while we let that one stew for a minute here. Athavan Kanapuli, hope I got that right, says, hi, I have a question. Is there a way to specify certain pods in a deployment to get killed when the horizontal autoscaler scales down the deployment? Mario, looks like you've answered this one, but I wanted to get this one on the video.
Sure. Yeah. Just really quick. That's, I mean, the HPA references of deployments, everything that's part of that deployment, every instance is impacted. So in that case, you'd have to make a separate deployment or something like that, which deployments track pods through labels. So, if you wanted to pull them out, you could remove the labels of those pods, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
All right, and another follow up here. Vishnu Prasad asks, is there a project or tools that would help us configure how and when to autoscale nodes up and down? Like in EKS node groups, when to scale down the nodes especially, mainly because certain loads can't use them when those metrics like CPU, memory are all the time scaling up and down. It looks like you've been answering all the questions in chat before we get to them.
So, they're the easy ones, man. I live in autoscaling. Yeah. The cluster autoscaler is great for that. I wouldn't say it's the most stable, perfect production piece of software, but it gets the job done. It logs. It has a config map that you can reference for status and kind of the decisions it's looking to make. And I've never had an issue with it talking to the AWS API to change ASG sizes, which is effectively what it's doing to scale the entirety of the cluster. So the automation where it kind of senses everything through labels and tags and whatnot is really good. And the Helm chart is great. We use it right now on all of our clusters. So one thing is multi-AZ is a little tricky. You might be out of balance in some cases, but I won't get into that. So there's docs there.
Okay. So let's circle back to Caroline's question if they weren't listening. Given a currently updated deployment, rolling in a new replica set and rolling out the previous one, which replica set of pods are taken away from if a user or scalar decreases? I think we asked for follow-up info on this one, right?
Yeah, we asked for follow up. I actually am looking at our live production cluster right now, and I actually went to the replica set view in my K9S interface, and I only see for any given deployment, let's call it edge platform, it's got, I see like 10 replica sets here, and all of them are zeroed out except for one, which actually is active and has the active number of instances. So in that case, I think that HPA, let's say, that's editing your deployment, the number of replicas should probably be working in just that replica set, because you're not draining that replica set entirely, because you're not doing a deployment or anything like that. There's no need for it to be killed at all. So that's my understanding. So maybe there's better docs or something around that.
Okay, awesome. And with that, we've reached the end of the queue of questions. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. We're going to get to Long's question next, which is the last one. So we probably have time for one or two more. So get them in. Metal Matzi, welcome, says, just saw monitoring mixing is being discussed here. There's even a Slack channel dedicated to here on the Slack, on the Kubernetes Slack. So thanks for that link. That's always useful. Long, welcome to the show, asks, is the stable/metric server supposed to work out of the box, or is it absolutely required to add the --kubelet-insecure-TLS flag? Sounds like some red flags immediately went off when they were asked to pass that flag. It's like, hey, wait a minute. And while we stew on that,
I think they fixed that, didn't they?
I'm wondering.
Been a while since I've installed the metric server, but I was pretty sure they fixed that at some point.
Yeah, I remember when I installed metric server, I had to pass that flag. I couldn't. Yeah, so I don't know.
That might be a follow-up. We might have to dig into why that is there. I see lots of people typing though, so let's see what the situation is. I don't know if is that what to use for APA? Is that what you're asking? All right, somebody remind me. I need to tweet this monitoring mixings channel. One of the things while we're stewing on this one for a bit is you'd be surprised how many channels we have on the Kubernetes Slack on just about everything cloud native related. So usually I could just hit Control K in Slack, and whatever channel thing you're having a problem with, you can usually go to that channel, and usually the developers are there, and it might get you a better answer than just posting it in Kubernetes-users, which almost has 100,000 people in it, and it's pretty hard to get focused content out of. Okay, so Long, I guess, has a different question. Is stable/metric server what to use for HPA as the gold standard? Is that what you're supposed? I think they're just asking, is that what you're supposed to use? And Mario, I saw you pay something, but then delete it. So I'll give you a second to.
I'm just a senior right now.
Yeah.
So I was just linking the official home chart for the metric server, which is also what we use. I was going to basically pose the question, like, I'm not sure what they do there, what the defaults are. That's always worked for us, even through upgrade 112 to 115, where we're at now. So, like, I'm guessing it does. I would look through the templates in there and see if that's an option they pass by default. So that would be, that'd be my 2 cents.
Anybody else have an opinion on this? C10 mentions if using Kubernetes, don't install the metric server. Okay, here we go. So what would this panel suggest if someone needed to use HPA as a source of metrics? What are you using, Mario?
Wait, so HPA isn't a source of metrics; it consumes metrics, I guess, is the differentiator.
Oh, so, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so like in our case, we have a Datadog cluster agent that provides an external metrics object, I guess, that has metrics as part of it. So we can leverage those in HPA and say HPA scale on number of requests going to each instances. We want it to be 100, so balance it out, kind of thing. So
It looks like people are typing, but let's give them a chance to. Because Menomati says, I really recommend the Prometheus adapter if you're on Prometheus anyway. It uses the same metrics that Prometheus already ingests.
Yeah, actually, I guess I'll pose this question to the rest of the panel. What is the go-to for Prometheus right now for kind of like the standard kind of ultimate deployment? I know in the Helm official charts there's a Prometheus operator, I think, that seems to include pretty much everything that you would need, including the node exporter, alert manager, kubestate metrics, Grafana, et cetera. Is that kind of still the go-to, or is anyone using anything else?
Hold on, we have some things
We
in chat.
we use. Hi, I'm sorry. Give me a second. We use. Oh my goodness. We used the Prometheus operator from the Helm charts, and we also wrote a secondary Helm chart that we use internally that standardizes our Prometheus CRD definition, so that we have a pretty consistent setup of what we do for Prometheus, whether it's in our cloud or edge sites. But that's worked really well for us so far. We haven't explored many alternatives because it ended up being so good.
Awesome, cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep.
Yeah, there's this CoreOS one, but I don't think. Oh, that is still updated. Okay.
Yeah. So they say Cube Prometheus is the standard. The Helm chart is based on that as well. Yeah. It looks like my Metamatsu Matthias there works on Prometheus, so he gets a +10 recommendation from a maintainer, gives you extra weighted. So he says, yeah, we're actively maintaining that repository. Lots of things going on daily. So thanks very much for that. That helps.
Yeah, to addition, so you don't really have to run Prometheus operator. For example, we are running vanilla Prometheus. It's just a regular stateful set. It's pretty easy to configure. So yeah, that's also always an option.
We should definitely, I think a Prometheus office hours would be a good one. That's what I was writing down. That's why I wasn't paying attention. I was like, we need to have a session on this. So good to know. All right. So we are really running out of time. I really appreciate everyone for showing up, especially those of you sharing your recommendations in chat. I'm going to give away 2 t-shirts here today. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you that you want a t-shirt, and then I will PM you with the store. You can always get all the goodies from the store from the CNCF. Big shout out to Google, StockX, Microsoft, VMware, and POV. Where do you work at again?
UW.
UW and Vapor.io for letting their engineers sit on this panel. If you're interested in sitting on this panel, we're always looking for volunteers. So we like to have like a rotating set of people so we can cover different levels of expertise and different areas of the project. And with that, there is a Prometheus ecosystem every month. If someone could drop a link to that in chat, I will make sure that gets to the show notes. The winners are Vishnu Prasad. You've won a Kubernetes t-shirt. And Athavan Kanpuli. Thank you for your questions. I will follow up with you. We are going to go live in another 2 hours. Jeffrey Sika will be grabbing a bunch of West Coasters, and we will go live again in this channel. So if you're listening, we do these a third Wednesday of every month. It's always a third Wednesday. We try to have as many sessions as possible. If you're interested in helping out, yeah, just let us know. Feel free to hang out in the channel. We like to keep, it's like a nice, much smaller group than trying to, get help in a channel with 100,000 people. Panel, any last thoughts?
I really just wanted to thank everyone who is asking some great questions. Definitely feel free to @ me or notice me or anyone in the panel, I think, and we'll help you any way we can. I feel like I dominated the conversation a little too much. I apologize for that. The rest of the people here are much smarter than me. I've just been delving in auto scaling and EKS too much lately. So that's life. But thanks guys for coming.
All right. Dave, Pav, Chris, anything else?
Just kind of again echo Mario. It's always great to be here. I'm always learning something new. It's fantastic. So thanks for all the questions.
The day we found out that someone had rewritten all these dashboards, and we could have just used those this whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, my life has forever changed. Thanks, Pav.
All right, with that,
Thank you, everyone.
All right, with that, thanks everyone. We'll see everyone in a few hours. Stay safe out there, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks.